So Peter, I assume this is the way I can pronounce your name. He is asking, what are the fundamentals of joint decision-making? So I assume you're referring to the fact that myself and Laurence are partners in a business and how we make decisions. So do you want to take that one first, Laurence?
No, you take it first.
Oh, no one on the side on this one.
So let's check our decision-making spreadsheet, shall we? It's a really good question. I mean, there's actually a book. I was chatting to the writer of a book called Decision Making for Dummies. So there's a dummies guide on how to make decisions if you're really struggling. So that would be a good place to start. But it's a really interesting topic because, even if you're just a sole founder, knowing what you base decisions on can be challenging. If you're, co-founding with 2 or 3 people, then decisions take longer. There's no doubt about it. Decisions take longer, but often you might find you get to the best decision. So I think one of the things that we think is really important is to understand what values are driving the decisions you're making. It's one of the things we talk about in homeschool. One of the exercises we get people to work on is to really understand, what are the values, what are the things that are really important to you, what are your beliefs as an individual and as a company, and are those aligned? So if you're in partnership with someone, making sure that you understand what are your drivers for making decisions, because then the decisions themselves should become easier once you have some building blocks to base those on. So if it was a product, when we were building websites for people, we would have some design principles, and really they are really values, but in a product sense, they're principles which guide the decisions. So what you can do there is really try and break down what are the things that are important to you before you set out on that journey, whether it's a project or a business, and then refer back to those every time you have to make a decision, to have that check to say, okay, are we still aligned to those things that we agreed right at the beginning? So values are an obvious one for me. But if you want to...
I think that values is, I think that whole thing in terms of having some kind of basis to benchmark whether what you're going to do is a good thing or a bad thing. Ultimately, within an organization, whether there's just 2 of you, 4 of you, or more, it's trust. And what you don't want to do is, particularly in this day and age where we need to be fast moving and getting things done, you don't want to be having to do decisions by committee every single time. So at some level, you need to give people some trust to make the right decision, because they know what's good for the group and what's good for the team. But also, there's responsibility. Each person has a responsibility around a particular area of what you're doing, and you just trust that they'll get on and make the right decisions based on where we're trying to take the group or the business, or however you're organized, whether it's just a partnership or maybe a large company.
Yeah, I think added to that is ownership. I think, like you said, really just making sure that everyone's clear, and we're working through this as a team at the moment. What are the projects within the business, and who owns which project, and who needs to support each other throughout those projects. And then that way, like you said, the trust comes in, because whoever's leading those has the autonomy to make those decisions, but as long as they seek advice and get help where they need it. So I think that's the key thing, is making sure you get all the information to hand, and then maybe it's a gut reaction, maybe it's data driven, depends on the personality, but ultimately trying to make sure you've made the right reason for the right decision for the right reason. Yeah,
it's having those fundamental guiding principles. There's a book called Good Strategy, Bad Strategy, and it's the standard business book about how to basically run a successful organization. But ultimately, he talks about the 3 fundamentals is you got to have good guiding principles, really. And that's one of the bases, because then you'll know what right actions to take. And you got a framework to basically test whether you're going in the right direction.
Yeah, and one thing I'd probably say is early on, if you're at the very early stage, a lot of the decisions you make will be gut driven. They'll be very focused on what feels right, given the fact I need to move quickly, how can I make this decision without having to seek evidence or data, because chances are you won't have much data to go on. Maybe as you start to grow the business and scale, or you have much more data to base decisions on, and those will be the guiding points, aligned to your values too, obviously, not just focused it on the data and money, but what's important to you too. So yeah, I think particularly early on, most entrepreneurs rely on their gut, and they can't explain why they made a decision. But if you've got a co-founder, then that's even more challenging. So just to bear that in mind too.
Yeah. There's an interesting side with that as well, is like being able to trust your gut. A lot of the people don't really know how to trust that feeling within them. And that usually comes, the ability to trust your gut comes from experience and just doing stuff and just repeatedly making mistakes, hopefully not catastrophic ones, but just making decisions. And over time, I think you'll get a feeling for, much more better intuition as to what's good or bad for what you're going to do.
Mm-hmm.